Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish, and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stay, and this show is brought to you by our wonderful Bestseller Academy Academates and our Patreon patrons, who are all wonderful people. We seriously could not keep the show going without your contributions and wonderful help. And we have two new patrons this week, Ivo Spira and Yvette Koltoth. Thank you both. You join the many, many patrons that keep this show running, and we thank you all from the bottom of our hearts.
Absolutely. And if you would like to join this wonderful group of merry writers, please pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support to support the show. Mr. Stay, is it spring in England officially, or have you still got crazy weather?
No, it's lovely. It's really nice. It's like, 14 degrees here. It's terrific. Claire's been out in the garden all day. Chickens are running about. I'm in a t-shirt, It's terrific. It's lovely. Spring has sprung.
It is absolutely lovely here. We came out of a really crazy snowstorm last week, and this week I'm seeing all the little crocuses coming up. I cannot believe it.
I was talking to someone on the Academy who's having one of our one-on-one sessions, and she lives in Texas. And you know what Texas has been through, these last few weeks. Yes. So It's gone from the day after to tomorrow to, out there it's like 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know how that works. But yeah, so it's crazy. It's almost like the climate is changing.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah. Talking of what's hot, your book is still in the charts, I hear, in the high charts. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, didn't we?
Nice segue. Very good segue. It's my third week, Pop Pickers, in the Hive chart, which is the chart for all the indie bookshops in the UK, which is just amazing. And what's lovely is, I'm getting indie bookshops contacting me saying, hey, can you do something for our blog? Can we do a signed book giveaway? Can we do this? Can we do that? So it's wonderful. It's and I'm getting, lovely feedback, lovely reviews. People are enjoying it. They're loving the audiobook. I've always said the audiobook's probably the best way to experience this. And it's been an absolute joy. So I'm really enjoying this author malarkey.
It's marvelous. Now, here's a big question for you that everyone wants to know. Have you experienced post-release fatigue yet?
Ooh. Are you talking about the book, right?
Absolutely.
No, the positivity. I think if it had been given a kicking, it might be a bit fatiguing, but there's a lot of positivity. I was on the radio yesterday, BBC Radio Kent. I was in their book club, and they enjoy it. It's always terrifying because if they were lukewarm in it could have been really cringy.
How does a book club work on the radio? So there's actually a group of people that literally read the book and then come on and chat with the author? How does that work?
They have one spokesperson, and she came on and said very nice things about it. And really, what's really lovely is people are getting it. All the kind of, without want to get too highfalutin, themes and ideas that I put into the book, people are understanding it and saying, this, and it's great. That's
really satisfying, isn't it? Because I think when you kind of spend all the time working on those and you're weaving them in the kind of background, it can be quite disheartening when people read it and completely miss the point.
Well, I mean, like I've said before, the book is theirs now. They can make of it what they will. It's entirely their right to completely miss the point. But, we had this with Back to Reality where, we got feedback from people and it's like, yeah, they get it. They really get it. It's fantastic. Brilliant. So it's all cool.
It's really good stuff as well, because I think one of the things that a lot of authors experience, I think most authors actually, when we kind of like pull the wide angle back, is that they spend all the time focusing, they write the book, they're really excited to get it out there, they release it, and then there's often this kind of just tumbleweeds, and it can be one of the most disheartening things. And I think what I've learned through watching you through this launch, and obviously what we attempted to do with Back to Reality as well, is that it really does pay to take time before you release your book to actually build up some momentum, because that momentum is what carries you over the release date and into at least that first few weeks, month, maybe 2 months and when you, I think it can be very disheartening. And I'm sure there's so many people going, yeah, that's me. I've had that with my book.
I think one of the biggest lessons we had with Back to Reality is it doesn't all just happen on launch day. You've got to think beyond launch day. So, I'm putting YouTube videos out there and blog pieces and this and that, and constantly banging the drum. It's you have to be a bit shameless. You have to self-promote a bit. You find a balance between annoying and enthusiastic, and you have to make the most of that period. And now my publisher is talking about pitching me for summer reading promotions and online promotions and stuff like that. For my own part, between book 1 and 2, I'm releasing a short story March, April, May, June in the same world. So people who've enjoyed the Crowfolk, I can keep them on the hook. I've got something new for them, a 5,000, 6,000 word story every month with featuring characters from the same world. They sign up to the newsletter and they get a free short story. And then so by the time we get to June, those are done. Then July, we might have a cover for the new book, so we can start talking about that. And then maybe I can put a first chapter up in August. And then September, we can start getting really excited. And then October is book 2. So I did sit down and think, okay, this is what I can do to keep banging the drum, but not saying the same thing over and over again. I think it is important to have something new to say, not just to say, I've got a book, please buy it. It's like, okay, I've got a book, but here's some new stuff. We're building a world here. We're building a series. Come and join us. You can jump in at any time. You can experience it this way or that way. So that there is a plan. I don't know if it will pay off.
Well, it's great. No, it's really good because it is all about creating events. Now, the book launch, the release of the book is an event. It's the big event. I mean, it's the biggest event. The book is out, but it's only one of what should be a number of events that happen prior to the book being released, and as many events as you can keep doing post-release. Because let's be honest, you should never stop promoting your book. You should never stop saying that you have a book out there, because if that lands on one person's ears, they go buy that book. You just never know. That book person might be an influencer. They might be somebody like my producer of a movie. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. So I think this idea that we put all of our eggs into one basket on release day. And what's really fascinating as well is the people that go around, and I think this is a classic curse of the indie author, is that you get so fatigued writing the book, you get the book out, you're desperate to get it out. There's this sense that we really need to hold back and build a bit of momentum, not just put it out straight away. But also, if we then get that experience, because we put it out and there's no audience there waiting for it, then we get downhearted, we get the tumbleweeds, we're looking at those poor Amazon sales. And then what do? As authors, we get thoroughly depressed. And what do? We go and write another book, because we then assume it's because the book's crap. And it's never because of that. It's always because there was never enough promotion around the book itself. And it can be a vicious cycle that I think a lot of authors can get into, where they just write, release, and then they just kind of self-flagellate. Yeah, book's not selling. I'm a rubbish author, and they either give up or just keep that process going. So it's really important, isn't it, to help people get to that point where they can see the marketing as essential for their future career.
And the thing about if you're in India as well, you can relaunch at any time. Totally. We're gonna talk about this in social media at the end. We've got one of our members of the Bestseller Experiment group on Facebook. He's relaunching with new covers. He's decided he's going to change the covers, and they look amazing, and they're going to make a difference. I think they're already making a difference to his sales. I was talking to author who's been on the show a couple of times, Michael R. Miller, who writes this kind of lit RPG fantasy stuff, and he changed the covers on one of his books, and he said it was one of these things where it was just starting to tail off, changed the cover, way straight back up again. Yeah, something like that can make all the difference.
Do you know, really there's almost a crazy idea, a bestseller experiment idea of what if somebody would change their cover annually, every year, change their cover annually, and relaunch the book as that. Now, what I would call this is recover. So if your book's not doing anything, recover it by putting out a new. I wonder if that would be an interesting experiment. We could do that with, Back to Reality. We love our cover, don't we?
We did it.
We did do it. We've had two covers.
And it worked.
I wonder if you could do limited edition covers where you do like the 2021 cover, the 2022 cover.
I mean, there's nothing to stop you from doing a new cover every year, apart from the expense. I mean,
that's the thing, yeah.
There's publishers do this all the time. I mean, particularly with their big brand authors. I remember every 2 or 3 years, there would be a conversation about, okay, the Ian Rankin, Michael Connelly, Mae Binchy, we need to refresh them. We need to change. Which, if you're a collector, if you're someone who likes collecting books and you like them all looking the same on the shelf, and you've got 2 books to go, and the publishers change the cover style, you're like, ah! But in terms of generating sales for a backlist and keeping it fresh, because the thing is, whenever we put out a new look for Ian Rankin, because he's a market leader, other publishers would imitate the style, and that's flattery, I guess, but it's one of those things where, okay, he doesn't stand out anymore, so we need a complete refresh, we need a brand refresh. So why not? If it's good enough for Ian Rankin, it should be good enough for you.
Well, let's be honest, the entire fashion industry lives off that very one principle of the new season's clothes, what's in this year, what colors are in this year. I think as well with regards to book covers themselves, when you think back to that one of the very first interviews we ever did with Shannon Mayer, I remember her saying that was the thing that changed her career. She went from like not really being able to sell her main book to now becoming multi-million selling author, and she pinpoints it back to the day that she changed the cover on the book. She believed in the book. She knew it wasn't because the book was bad. She just knew the cover didn't reflect. It doesn't even have to be a bad cover. It could be that the cover does not reflect the audience that you're trying to attract to buy the book. And I remember we had these conversations with our book designers, didn't we?
We did indeed. I mean, one of the things with The End of Magic, my fantasy novel, is I think the cover works great for the UK because it has that iconic thing. It's 2 bold colours. You've got silhouettes of characters. And I think that for the UK works really well. I don't think it works in the US. You look at US fantasy covers, they prefer almost photorealistic paintings showing characters in action, in the thick of the action. So for the best example of that, if you look at Brandon Sanderson's covers in the UK, similar kind of thing to mine, basic colours, shapes, silhouettes against the white background. Yet in the States, it's full bleed painting, really high quality. I mean, we spoke to Philip C. Quantrell. He uses the same artist in his sales. He does no marketing, Philip. You remember he does no marketing. He just hired Brandon Sanderson's artist. So that's where he's invested his money,
and probably spent less money overall, right? When you think about it, ironically,
yeah. And his books sell like they're gangbusters. So why not? Why not?
Well, that's a whole other conversation about different covers for different countries. We never really even have discussed that with regards to. I mean, we've changed the cover once on our own book back to reality, but we've never thought about. But I guess in some ways, if you put it out there. First of all, you can see through Amazon's sales where if it's selling equally across both, then I guess that gives you some indication. But if it's not selling in one, but it's selling really well in another country, that could give you some.
The problem you have as an indie is if you're selling through KDP, you can only have one cover for all territories.
Right.
Whereas if you're with so Brandon in the UK is published by Gollancz, I think he's Orbit or Tor in the US. So they're 2 separate publishers who make their own decisions independently about what cover art they want to use. And so same with Joe Abercrombie and a lot of those big, crime authors as well. Michael Connelly's a really interesting one because whenever he's got a new book coming out, he'll put something on Instagram and it'll have 3 covers. It'll be US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. 3 different styles for each one. Not dramatically different, strangely enough, just different enough. And it's it clearly works for him, so interesting.
Brilliant stuff. We could talk about this all day, couldn't we? And we probably will. But just a bit of food for thought there, folks. If you are listening to this and you're looking at your book sales and you're thinking, you know what, I really want to give it a boost. If you haven't ever tried changing the cover, and honestly, don't try on. Please do not try to design your own covers unless you are a professional graphic designer or you just. It's like. Yeah, it's like, you shouldn't cut your own hair. Because everyone who thinks they're good at designing are kind of probably okay at design. Like, I'm okay at it. I've got an eye for design. But when I get a professional to do it, I'm like, yeah, that's why he's designing and I'm writing. Or So honestly, you do what you do best, which is write. That's you started writing because you're a writer, you're not necessarily a designer. Put even if it's a couple of $100 or pounds, just even try it out. just get somebody to design a cover. And I've got to say, a lot of the covers that we're seeing with our kind of BXP team and the Academates, it really, I'm seeing the standard, like it's almost like everyone's like, oh blimey, look at that cover.
Yeah.
And you can see
really
that everyone's stepping up their game. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why we're seeing so much success with these groups of authors that we have in these teams. So interesting stuff. To be continued, folks, to be continued. But today, let's dive in. We've got the most, I mean, this is a bit of an exclusive, isn't it, Mr. Stade? Tell us about this incredible interview today.
Oh, I'm just delighted to have got Linwood Barclay on the podcast. One, he's just one of the nicest writers I know. He's such a lovely guy. He, I met him a few times when I was at Orion. He was always very, very generous with his time. Lovely guy. He's a New York Times bestselling author, 20 novels out there. He spent 3 decades in newspapers before turning full-time to writing thrillers. He's been translated into more than 24 languages, sold millions of copies. Stephen King's a fan, all kinds of, they've been optioned for film and TV and what have you. But he's got a new novel called Find You First, and the publishers sent me a proof copy, and it just caught me at the right time. We're in lockdown, it was a weekend. I thought, okay, I'll pick it up, I'll have a look. I seriously could not put it down. I burned through it. He is the master of page turning, fast page turning joy. There's so much glee, and he's great with the high concept as well. So this is a great conversation. If you want to write commercial fiction, sit down, take some notes. We discuss head hopping, point of view, first chapters, flashbacks, fan fiction, deadlines, writer's block, self-doubt. We have listener questions on high concept, returning characters, and much more. Now, just a warning. We had some sound issues, okay? But our editor, JD, bless him, he's worked really, really hard to tone them down. So it's gone from, my ears, why do you hate me? To, what was that? So hopefully it won't be too distracting. Also, we recorded this rather, not long after the storming of the Capitol building, and there's some oblique references to that, just to give you some idea of what we're talking about. But this is such a fun interview.
Fascinating stuff. Well, let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the most incredible Linwood Barclay. Linwood
Barclay, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm just great, Mark. Nice to be with you.
It's lovely to speak to you. And we're going to be talking about your new novel, Find You First, which I just burned through. I just picked it up, opened it, and I could not stop reading it, and it was such a joy. And we're going to talk about it in more detail, the craft of how you put together a novel like this. But tell us first about Find You First.
Find You First is a thriller about a guy named Miles, who is a kind of very wealthy tech guy. He's reached a certain age. He's in his 40s. He's not married, has no kids, and so forth. And he finds out that he has a disease that's going to, it's terminal. And his doctor says to him, well, it's a good thing you don't have kids, because if you did, this is about 50-50 on inheriting this condition. And then he has to think back to the fact that he was some 20 years ago a sperm donor. So there are kids out there, grown adults now, who may very well be in a position who are going to have this condition. And he feels an obligation to start finding them, to sort of warn them, but also these are his heirs. And once Miles starts looking for these individuals, they start getting picked off one by one. And one of the first ones that he finds is a young woman named Chloe, who's an aspiring documentarian. And with Chloe's help, they start trying to figure out what's happening to all of these others, products of his sperm donation more than 2 decades ago.
And it's, like I say, it's just an absolute page turner. Miles and Chloe are very much at the heart of this, and it's a dynamic you don't see very often in storytelling, which is a father and a daughter. Was that something new to you?
It just kind of developed. It's funny. I don't think I quite anticipated how central this relationship would be in the book until I got into it. And once I was into it, it just was their closeness and their working together that became really kind of the heart of the novel in many ways. And so it's a lot. And of course, Chloe's half his age and very independent minded, and she doesn't take any kind of guff from anybody, especially this fellow who's very likely her father. So she was a fun character to write.
Now, this is a real roller coaster read. It is an absolute delight, and it constant surprises, constant twists and reversals. Now, I've read in previous interviews with you that they surprise you as much as the reader. You don't really outline very much, do you?
Well, it's kind of, I'm one of these guys who outlines up to a point. I know the big picture and I know where I want to end up, but what happens along the way, I don't know. And so I don't see the opportunities that exist in the novel until I'm kind of well into it. So I can be in a chapter and I think, what's a really logical way that this chapter would end? And is there a way I can make that not happen? So a lot of twists are really kind of minor twists or kind of sleight of hand kinds of things. But I think that the trick is I don't want to get bored. And if I get bored, I know the reader will get bored. So it's really a case of keeping myself interested, I think.
But when you have one of those big turning points, obviously that is a choice that you make as a writer, and the choices we make as writers have ramifications, much like they do for the characters in the story. Is that the point where you kind of stop, sit back and go, okay, where does this go now?
Occasionally. The biggest twists are usually ones that I have known were coming for a long time, and I kind of can't wait to get to them. So those ones are kind of built in my plan for the most part. So they're part of the plan. But there are smaller ones that come along the way. I don't know quite how they come about in some ways. It's kind of like playing the piano by ear. You just kind of know where you're going, and when you get there, you know what to do.
Excellent stuff. Now, we love authors who are, rule breakers, who do things a little bit differently. And I just want to talk about the first chapter specifically. And listeners, if you're listening to this, go find You First, okay, on your online retailer of choice, because usually they'll have the first chapter, and dig into this first chapter just to see how this is done. Because we've had editors come on here, we've had authors come on here, and they say similar things, which is, don't head hop, okay? Choose a point of view for a chapter, okay, and stick with that point of view. But in your opening chapter, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but this is a thriller, and there's someone in that opening chapter who isn't making it to chapter 2, basically. And you start in their point of view, and then you ease into the point of view of 2 other people, and then 1 person. And I was reading it thinking, this is genius. You can't see the joins or anything. How aware are you when you're writing of those little, I won't say rule-breaking moments, but, where you're doing something like that, where you're taking a principle and turning it on its head?
That's a good question. I mean, thank you for that comment. I mean, I have to say, it wasn't a conscious thing. I mean, what happens in that sort of prologue is, yes, we do start with 1 character, although it's kind of hard to maintain his point of view when he's dead. So you know what I mean? So you do kind of have to switch. So, I mean, there's a spoiler, folks, but it's, so you really have to, and because it's, I know that when you're writing first person, you really do have a kind of rigid point of view in a storyline, in a chapter that's, say, first person. And often even in third person novels, which this is, you do kind of have a point of view of whoever the central character is in that chapter. But this is really, that opening chapter is one where the camera is moving around, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's moving from one person to another. So you really do have, you're coming at that from different perspectives and only probably, I don't know what it is, like 8-9 pages. But a lot happens in that opener, and there are even within that prologue, we have a twist, and so those changes of points of view are rather necessitated by the fact that certain people have departed from life.
It was great. I mean, I picked it up knowing nothing about the book. It had been sent to me as, oh, great, new Linwood Barclay. I open it up, and it said, oh, it's about this guy. Oh no, it's not about it. Can't be about this guy, So it was so much fun. And then the next rule that you break. So you say you have this little prologue, and then I turn the page, and in big letters it says 3 weeks earlier, which again is one of those things you hear editors saying, "Oh, don't do that, don't do that." But you did it. You went there, and I salute you for it.
Sometimes you really want to start a story with a bang. You want to start it with something big, and if you tell your story in a kind of linear time, the big things don't happen till later. So you really need to do a kind of what I'd call a flash forward. You need to take some event that's going to happen and just use that to grab the reader by the lapels and just shake them and say, hey, this is a big thing. And after that, we're going to take you back. And where I sort of first started seeing that, even before I started writing novels as much as now, was TV and movies, notably J.J. Abrams, who, even going back to the Alias series that he made, that first one, Alias, and then think of Mission Impossible 3, he takes a really terrifying, dramatic moment to get you in the first 3 minutes. And then he's got you, and then he says, okay, this happened later. Now we're going to show you all the things that brought us to that point. And I think it's an interesting technique. And I mean, it may very well be that I'm starting a story that way, and because we all have shorter attention spans now, and we feel we haven't got much time to get your attention and hold on to you. And so I think we got to grab you right away. And because there are about a million other things that could distract you, from binge watching series or playing on your stupid phone or God knows what. So we don't have a lot of time to get your attention. So this is what we're going to do.
It's interesting hearing you say that, because we had Joe Hill on the show.
Oh yeah,
and he said pretty much the same. He said, "Have you seen Netflix? Have you seen what's in TV? And this is what we're competing against now.
Well,
so
it's funny. I was at a Thriller Writers Conference a few years ago, and all of us were sitting around and said, "Oh, have you seen Breaking Bad? Have you seen this? And have you seen them watching 24?" And then it kind of hit us that nobody was saying, "Have you read such and such?" And it just dawned on us, oh my God, we're eating our own. We're sitting here talking about TV shows at a writer's convention and not about anything that anybody has written, so.
Well, let's talk about TV for a while, because I saw somewhere that you started out by writing what we would call fan fiction for the TV show Man from U.N.C.L.E. Is that where you got the bug?
Yep. In fact, I credit that 1960s spy show in many ways with my wanting to become a writer, because when I was 9-10 years old and that show debuted, I was obsessed with it. There was just something about it that just grabbed my imagination. And so an episode a week was not enough for me. So I had to create more adventures with these characters on my own. And so I had gotten my dad to teach me how to type, because handwriting stories took too long. So I got a 2-minute typewriting lesson on an old Royal typewriter that weighed about the same as a Volkswagen. And so I started typing out novellas when I was, 11, 12, 13 years old, that were probably, 30, 40 page adventures about the characters from Man from U.N.C.L.E. Because like I say, an episode a week was killing me. I needed more. And then having started doing that, there were other shows that I thought, I'm going to write. I wrote novellas based on Mission Impossible and Columbo. I wrote a lot of Columbo novellas. And I was writing these all through my teens. So in many ways, when people say, well, what inspired you to write? And they're waiting for you to say Hemingway or Shakespeare. And I'm going, TV. It was TV. And I think that's carried through to the writing, because to me, chapter breaks are commercial breaks. They always ended TV in the 60s and 70s, that there were these sort of quarterly breaks. And they always ended, before they went to commercial, with some kind of a mini cliffhanger, so that you thought, well, if I'm going to get a snack and go to the bathroom, I got to go right fast. I got to go and get back, because I have to see what's going to happen next. And I think, to me, that's how you end a chapter. You have to end a chapter in such a way that you're compelled to go to the next one.
Fantastic. And those typing lessons, or that 2-minute typing lesson that your father gave you, it paid off, because you were writing in newspapers for 3 decades. And
yeah.
I know from talking to editors that they love journalists who become novelists because they know how to hit a deadline. But what other skills did you bring with you from working at the papers?
Well, yeah, I did. I worked in newspapers for 3 decades. The bulk of it at Canada's largest circulation paper, the Toronto Star, and I was hired there as an editor. I spent 12 years as an editor, assistant city editor, news editor, life editor. I did all those kind of tasks. And then I started writing allegedly a humor column, which I did for 14 years, before I left that paper in 2006. And I'll tell you what, working in a newspaper has a couple of ways of affecting how you work as a novelist. One, as you said, is deadlines. Deadlines are God. You don't miss deadlines. And they're everything. So deadlines are a big thing. But the other, I think, most important thing is you learn not to be precious. And you learn that writing is a job. And so, when I was a columnist and I wrote 3 columns a week, imagine if I had called the editor and said, I'm just not feeling it today. The muse hasn't struck. And so I think I might have writer's block and so forth. Well, any editor would say, well, why don't you have writer's block on another paper? And So, I mean, when you get up in the morning, you go to work. And so my goal when I'm writing a novel is to sit down and I want to get 2,000 words done. And some days I might not quite make it. Some days I'll do better than that. But the job, it's a job. And I mean, I rant about writer's block all the time. I mean, do plumbers get plumber's block? Do teachers get teacher's block? I mean, why are we so special that we have a condition to describe getting out of work, you know? So I think that's what working at a newspaper really does. It teaches you not to be precious. And I mean, and I've worked in newspapers and had stuff ripped to shreds and rewritten and redone and done it, and all done in minutes. And so you learn that it's you just can't be too ridiculous and full of self-importance, I think, about your work.
Okay, but here's a thing for you. Deadlines are one thing, but when you're starting a new novel, do you ever doubt yourself?
I doubt myself every single step of the way. I'm sitting here right now doing it. I know, like, why would this guy want to talk to me? Didn't he have somebody important to talk to today? So yeah, I think that writing is very much one of the biggest parts of writing is just thinking, oh my God, I'm completely terrible at this. And I've fooled everybody into thinking that I can do this, and they're publishing my books, and what a bunch of idiots they are to go out and buy them. I mean, it's terrible stuff. So most writers I know are like that. But, but the flip side, like I said before, it's still a job and you have to get to work. And you have to put those doubts aside and get it done. So when I start a book, I'm not usually too worried in that sense. I think, though, the challenge is when you start a new book, you think, I want this to be the best one I've ever done. Every time you write a book, you think, I hope this is better than all the ones that came before it. And sometimes you manage it, and other times not so much, but you try. So that's kind of the goal, is to, every book be the one that's the best. And so if that answers the question.
It does. And reading Find You First, there's a kind of glee in the writing. You really seem to enjoy messing with the reader. Is that what makes your day?
Oh yeah, I do love doing that. And there's, and I don't want to do any spoilers, but there's an escape that spans several chapters towards the end. I just could not wait to write. I had such a blast writing that particular scene. And because it's kind of over the top in a way, but I think that if current events have taught us anything in the last 6 months, that you just can't write anything that's over the top. No. I mean, it's like if you had written 3 years ago in a novel the things that have happened in the last month, people would say, well, that could never happen. Now I feel novelists can always say, oh, really? Are you sure? So I had a great time writing that. And I do love writing the twist because and a lot of times when close friends or somebody read it, and it's like, oh God, just shut up and let me read the book. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of it that's when you get to it, it's a lot of fun.
Wonderful stuff. I've got a couple of listener questions. Got a question from Laura Shepherd. Any tips for executing high concept ideas without it coming across as gimmicky? And I'm talking to the guy here who wrote a novel called Elevator Pitch. See, high concept is in your ballpark. How do you pull off those ideas? Because it's got to be more than just a clever idea, hasn't it?
Well, it does. It has to be more. It has to be a clever idea that can sustain 100,000 words, and so it can't just be like, "Wow, this is neat." There has to be a foundation to it. It has to be, for the most part, believable, or at least be something that people are willing to sort of suspend disbelief to take on that idea. And when I first had the idea for Elevator Pitch, which is, as you may know, it's about a guy who's New York City being terrorized by somebody who's sabotaging elevators. And when I first had the idea, I thought, oh, this is too crazy. This is too wild an idea. And I happened to mention it to my agent the day I had thought of it. I said, oh, I had this crazy idea about a guy who's a serial killer who wipes out people by sabotaging lifts. And she said, oh my God, you have to start writing that tomorrow. And so, she was able to see that, no, that is really a great concept. You just have to sort of sit down and think it through. Can they make this work? And that was very true with Find You First. And then a better idea came to me. And I think that that idea, I think, is ultimately believable based on things that we may have read about certain people in the last several years.
Yes. When you get these ideas, when you get okay, a guy's going to terrorize people by sabotaging elevators, do you sort of file that away for later, or do you just get to work on it straight away?
Well, that depends what I'm doing at the time. I mean, I might have an idea when I'm already finishing working on another book or something. So I would tuck it away. And the thing is, if I sit down and think, I need to think up a really high concept, great idea, go. It won't happen.
No.
The idea is just kind of like the elevator pitch just came to me because I was listening to an item on the local news. And then the idea was there. It just was instantly there. What if you had a guy who was killing people off by sabotaging elevators? Now, if I hadn't listened to that radio broadcast or that news broadcast, that idea never would have happened. So you just have to be kind of a receptor. You're just sort of waiting for something to hit you. And I was, in fact, when I had the idea for Elevator Pitch, I was still in the midst of writing the novel before that called A Noise Downstairs. So I had to set it aside and know that that would be the next thing I would do.
Wonderful. Your titles as well are just amazing. Do they come first? Do they come quite a way into the process?
Well, they're often a committee decision. There's so many things that go into a title. I mean, first of all, you may have a great title and find out it's been used recently. You come up with a title and you think, well, it's been used. There's all sorts of reasons as to why a title may or may not work. And I think I've done the title for about half of my books. And the rest have been kind of, committee decisions between editors and publishers and agents and so forth. What works for everybody? Because, there have been instances where books have been released with different titles in North America versus, say, England. And I think that just leads to immense confusion. So for readers. So we don't want that to happen. And, it's just kind of capturing, like when I wrote a book a few years ago called Trust Your Eyes, which was about a guy who was obsessed with a sort of Google Street View type website and spent all of his time on it. I was going to call it The Traveler. And my editors and so forth said, that sounds like a science fiction book. That doesn't really work. And so it was back to, as they say, back to the drawing board. So there's a lot that goes into titles.
I've got another question from Christopher Wills, and he says, in a series with a returning protagonist, should a writer show any character arc or character development through the series? Now, I know you've done series like the Zach Walker mysteries, and you did the Promise Falls books. You don't do huge. I mean, what's interesting with you is you have some characters return, but more often than not, you do standalones. But where you've done those series where characters return, and what did you find was helpful? Was the character development helpful, or was it like that Columbo thing where they come back for a new adventure each time?
Well, and I think that every writer has to do their own what works for them. I mean, back in the when we watched TV in the 60s and 70s, there was no character arc. You could watch any episode in any order and it wouldn't make any difference. And so that worked that was fine. And then once we got into the 80s and we started having shows like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere, suddenly we were having arcs, storylines that span, many episodes and seasons. And I think it's whatever works for, whoever's doing it. And when I was doing the 4 Zach Walker novels, there is kind of an arc to those because Zach starts off with a certain very kind of a behavior that gets him in a lot of trouble, and he has to learn from that as the books progress. And so they're best read in order. And the Promise Falls trilogy that I wrote, Broken Promise, Far From True, and the 23, those must be read in order because that's really just one big book. And I think what I learned from all that is I'm not going to do it again because and not just because I thought I should write them all at once and I wrote all 3 books in 15 months and it just about killed me. But the other thing is, that when they were rolled out, the publishers were reluctant to make too clear that this was a trilogy because they were afraid if they wrote, this is book 1, nobody would buy it until book 3 was out. And so what ended up happening was readers were all confused. They would get to the end of book 2, which was unresolved, and they said, well, what the hell? And I have to write them back on Facebook or Twitter saying, there's another book. And it just led to so much confusion that I thought, I'm never doing this again. So for me, I find standalones are really the best. There may be a little hint or a character from another book, but it won't matter whether you have read it or not. And so that's kind of the lesson I learned. And moving forward, I'm kind of going in that direction.
Wonderful stuff. Talking about moving forward, what's coming next from you, Linwood?
Well, I got Find You First, obviously, which is imminent. I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's like a Michael Crichton thriller with sort of tech elements. And we've been trying to, and we think we're finally going to get it out later this year, maybe as an ebook only, we're not sure. But it's so different than from what I usually do that we kind of been struggling with what to do with it. But I'll give you the elevator pitch for it, which is think Jurassic Park, but instead of dinosaurs, it's self-driving cars. And you have a situation, a test community, a kind of Martha's Vineyard area where a Tesla-like company comes in and says, the best way to test self-driving cars, autonomous cars, is if the only kind of cars on the road are those, because they all talk to each other. They're like a network. They're a hive mind, So everybody agrees to surrender their regular cars to the mainland, and then a virus gets introduced into the system, and all the cars become homicidal. So it's kind of like 1,000 Christines. And I had such a blast writing this book. It was so much fun. I don't even have a title. I have a title, but I don't think it's going to survive. So, but that book I've been teasing people with in my newsletter and so forth for a long time. And I think this is the year that'll be out. And also I've actually finished the first draft of what will be the 2022 book, which has a working title of She's Back. And I haven't even heard from I've just delivered it to my publishers last week. My editor thinks it's the best thing I've done since No Time for Goodbye, which was my huge breakout book back in 2008. So that's what's happening there. And right now my plate is clear. We're sort of semi-lockdown here in Toronto, so it's going to be more binge watching and then working on my insane model railway in the basement. There's a couple of TV or movie things that are in the pipe that may or may not happen. And so fingers crossed on those.
Well, that's wonderful. Looking forward to all of that. But folks, grab a copy of Find You First. You will not regret it. It's an absolute trip. Linwood Barclay, thank you so much for speaking to me today and hope to speak to you again soon.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. As a Canadian, he does continue that tradition of the nicest author on the planet. I found living out in Canada, there's just this really lovely flow to Linwood. It's absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I absolutely loved, he talks about, we've talked about this before, about journalists converting to how many people have I can't even begin to remember now how many authors, best-selling authors that we've interviewed.
If we did a pie chart, there would be journalists, lawyers taking up 2/3, and then everyone else.
Exactly. But I'm fascinated. We've talked a lot about deadlines in the podcast. We've talked about deadlines as courses that we've created in the academy. But I don't think there's any better training for writing a book than being a journalist. And the way that Linwood described it, of these, if you're 5 minutes late with an article, then the whole paper just collapses. I think there's something there, isn't there? It's like it's enforced training, but it must be absolutely brilliant. There's probably no surprise he's written so many books.
Well, for me, it's writing on set on a film. When you're writing a screenplay, I come down here first thing in the morning, and I've got at least a couple of hours, crack my knuckles, sit back, make a cup of tea, start writing, stare out the window because it's spring, the blue tits are going into the birdhouse, and then I write some more. Can't do that when you're on set. If you're on set and someone says, okay, this bit of dialogue doesn't work, the actors have had this idea, can you rework it around that idea? Oh yeah, sure, right, there you go, half an hour. you got to write that. You can't faff about on Facebook or Twitter or sit staring out the window. You got to get on with it. And I quite enjoy it because you write without any pretension, without, it's kind of fearless. You just think, right, I just got to get this down. I just got to do this. I just got to get on with it.
It's almost like you cut out the judgment of everything that you're doing. You don't have time to judge it, but also it's like the adrenaline of having to save a child. I mean, not it's a bit extreme of an example, but like having to save a child from a car that's coming along. But it's that moment where you just dig into something that you sometimes otherwise can't access. You go into a pool of creativity where you just say, I've got to dig deep right now. I've got to pull out my very best work and I've got to do it right this second. And yet so foreign, isn't it, to what we all would do. And like you say, and you sit down and you're just like, dum-de-dum-de-dum. And it's that, what they say, your writing will expand to fill the time available, I think it's a kind of an alternative version of the original quote. And I think that it is very much this idea of, what fascinates me is, what if we could get into that zone? Like, what if we could get into that zone at our own writing desk and have that sense of insane writing that we dive deep?
We've got an interview coming soon with Dean Wesley Smith, and this is how he writes everything. He calls it writing into the dark. He just opens up the computer and writes. Doesn't know where he's going. Doesn't stop. Just keeps going. And he gets books done in a draft. So subscribe for that one, folks. You don't want to miss that one out. That is a fantastic episode coming in a few weeks. So yeah, Dean Wesley Smith.
It's incredible. The other thing he mentioned as well, and when you get that situation where you're writing to a deadline, which, as we know, if you're an indie author, you have to create false deadlines for yourself ultimately, or try and find an accountability partner, or join the Bestseller Academy, where we're asking people to write their book in 12 months. And it's really working. Like, people have incredibly stepped up their game. People have said, if I hadn't joined the Academy, I would not be anywhere near as progressed in my book. And that's so incredible to hear. So there is value to that. There's a value to being part of a group where you're all working towards that goal. But the thing that I love that Linwood said is, he talks about this idea of writer's block again and again, something that we've had come up. We've had some guests that have said it's just a figment of our imagination. It's Osler and
Huckabee and Osler.
Osler said writer's block. It doesn't exist. It's just something we make up to procrastinate. And I don't know if Linwood said this on purpose, but he said, what about in other professions? And he said, plumber's block. And I'm like, how bloody brilliant is that? Plumber's block. I'm sorry, I can't sort out your drains today. Got plumber's block. But I think that, and I have absolutely, since those very early interviews, I have taken on my own story that writer's block doesn't exist. I choose not to believe it. I choose to just believe that I'm not feeling it today, but it doesn't mean that I can't write.
Yeah. I mean, look, the thing is, we're living in a world where there's lockdown, people are having serious mental health issues. There may be perfectly valid reasons why they don't want to sit down and write. They might have other bigger problems to worry about, and I totally get that. But if you're in the zone for writing, if you're keen to write, if you've got a passion for writing, writer's block is just another word for problem solving. You just have a problem. I mean, like I said, I've been working on short stories and they're really hard. There's no wriggle room in short stories for fluff, or faffing about. Every word has to count. It's really, I know I had a thing last week. I wrote the same sentence 12 times over. I swear to God, again and again. And I'm sitting there going, I keep rewriting this, but it isn't. If anything, it's getting worse. So it happens to everyone. But you find solutions. You step away from it. You go for a walk. In my case, I took it off the screen, put it on the notebook, and did a bit of free writing, and just came up with something, and that helped. I think experience helps because you've got through this before. You've broken the sound barrier once, you can do it again. You've gone on before about the 4-minute mile. You've done the 4-minute mile once, you can do it again. And so can we all, so, well, not the 4-minute mile, not me anyway. God, I collapse in a heap. But, you've solved this problem before, you can solve these problems again. So a little bit of experience really helps. And if you're starting out for the first time, these can seem insurmountable. These can seem problematic. But yeah, just get words on the page and then I was talking to one of the one-on-ones today at the Academy. I've got someone who's finished their first draft, and they're overjoyed that they finished their first draft because now they've got something to work with. They can mold it into shape.
And I think of when I hear the words writer's block, I envisage literally nothing coming out, because that's what a block is. It's not that your writing's a bit rubbish or you're just not feeling it today. It's like you're just sitting there with a blank page staring at it. And I think when you hit that place, if you think, I just don't know what to write, then you write about what you're feeling. Like, you don't have to write about, to carry on the story, just write about what you could envisage to be your writer's block. And that gets you writing, and that might actually unclog, because it's about flow, isn't it? I mean, joking about plumber's block, ultimately, if there is a block in your pipe, it's about getting a little bit of flow initially, and that makes it easier, and eventually it all unplugs. So if you just start writing a little bit, then in theory it should work itself out, so to speak. But
I mean, one of the reasons notebooks works for me is no one else sees those notebooks. No one else will ever see them. It's just for my eyes only, and I can write absolute gibberish, but it gets the brain ticking over, and eventually you write something out. Okay, I can use that. Cool. Okay, let's go on.
Isn't it refreshing as well to hear Linwood talk about imposter syndrome? I mean, he talked about, and jokingly about, well, why are you interviewing me today? And there surely is someone better out there. I love the fact that we get to talk with people who are at the pinnacle of their game, that everyone looks to and thinks, God, one day I wish I could be selling, I wish I could get Stephen King as a fan. I wish I could be selling millions of books. And yet we hear it again and again and again. Everyone, doesn't matter how successful you are, everyone always has this little bit of imposter syndrome, or a big bit of imposter syndrome, making them think, why does anyone want to read this? So I think we all just have to kind of accept that it's part of the writing process and get on with it, because I've heard this so many times now. It's lovely and refreshing every single time we hear it, because it gives everyone else the permission just to kind of deal with it and move on, and know they're never probably going to get rid of it. I think the moment you do, your writing probably does go downhill to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. I think doubt is just part of the process, second guessing yourself, and you can, cope with it in various ways. You can just plow through it and write on, or you can step back and go, okay, is there a problem with this? How do I solve this? But I think it is healthy. I think you should embrace it and work with it. And don't let it cripple you and get you into a sort of downward spiral.
Absolutely. Another way of looking at it is it's the thing that keeps the axe sharp, because ultimately, if you get to a point in your writing where you become overconfident in your writing, that's where the writing will reflect that. It'll start to just, it'll just be like loose and won't have that edge to it. So it's fascinating. Was there anything else that came up for you in that interview, Mark, when you chatted with Linwood?
One thing I think I want every writer, particularly writers who are just starting out, writers can get very precious about ideas. You probably see it more in screenwriting than you do in novel writing, but you get people go, I've got an idea, but I don't want to talk about it because someone will steal my idea. And it's like, no one's going to, it's not. And, at the end, Linwood was openly discussing this big high concept idea for his next book about self-driving cars,
which I have to admit, if you go back and remember my first idea that I sent you before Back to Reality, I thought, blimey, it's going to happen.
But what he knows, Linwood knows ideas are not enough. Everyone has ideas, and I can guarantee the idea that you think that is this precious little jewel that no one else has had, there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? There's probably 1 million of them have had the same idea, okay? He knows it's not all about ideas. It's all in the execution. So if you're listening to this and thinking, damn, I had a story about self-driving killer cars, it doesn't matter. It's all about the execution. Yours will be different. If it's a personal expression of who you are and the ideas that you've got about self-driving killer cars, then, tell your story, make your voice heard. I think there's enough room in the world for, plenty of books about self-driving killer cars.
Well, and there is another one, a screenplay that I've been writing for 1.5 years. So it's not about self-driving killer cars, but it's taking that concept of
Oh,
Yeah. It's linked into the screenplay that I've been writing, but it's quite a bit different. But and actually, weirdly enough, born from that very first idea I sent you, which was, do you remember that? It was about a guy in a basement of in Silicon Valley that basically hacks into self-driving cars and assassinates people. Yeah, it's
excellent.
I'm sure, I'm sure there's another 10,000 people that are going, "Oh no, that's my idea." Don't worry, we can all write our own version of it. But it's fascinating to see that. And actually, what was really great is for everyone who was at Mark's the group coaching in the academy. So each month we do 2 group coaching sessions. Mark does a craft coaching session, and I do a life coaching for writers session. It's wonderful. We have this massive Zoom call with like loads of people. It's just fantastic. And that very point that you mentioned about people being concerned about their ideas and holding on to them, that one came up, and there's a whole like 10-minute segment, I think, that we've archived on the Academy of you talking specifically about that. And what I tend to see is it's a very common thing. Not just in writing, actually, but in music. People are saying, "Oh, well, I don't want to send you my track because if it gets out to the internet and someone copies it," and it's a thing that we all go through. I think when we start off, and then we become a little bit less precious and a bit more relaxed, and realize that actually, there's tons of other people who, if I always say to people, if you want someone, if someone steals your idea, well, let them, because it'll only be of value if they go on and make millions out of it. At that point, you bring out your book and say, "Excuse me." It's what all these people have been doing with like Ed Sheeran and the artists. They're going, some 1970s like unknown rock group are coming out saying, "Oh, he based his million-selling song on our 1970s hit." And I think, unfortunately, a couple of times they've won, and then it seems like it's a free-for-all right now, where like every
music's slightly different in that the way the law works around that, you get musicologists on board, and they will say, actually, you've got the combination of melody and chord sequence and that, unfortunately, the law also, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side of the argument you're on, it doesn't matter if you say, "Well, I never heard that song before." I mean, both George Harrison and Radiohead, George Harrison, "My Sweet Lord," someone else had that tune and melody before him. Radiohead's, I think it's "Creep," has the same melody and chord sequence as the Hollies' "The Air That I Breathe."
Yeah. If
you listen to those two back to back. Now, there was no accusation of actual plagiarism. It's just one of those things. But because of that, the Hollies get a credit on the Radiohead song.
Yeah. And when you've got a 3-minute song, there's a lot more opportunity for that to happen. When you've got a 200-300 page book, it becomes much more watered down. And
it's more about personal expression. And, you can have, I mean, just this week there was a fun Gerard Butler movie, Greenland, about a comet hitting the Earth. Now, how many films have you seen about comets or asteroids hitting the Earth? And
I actually saw the preview for that on Amazon Prime, I think it was, and I was watching, going, "Oh, why are they advertising that film that came out like 10 years ago?"
Is this Deep Impact?
Deep Impact, yeah, that's it.
Or is it Meteor with Sean Connery? Which one is it? And it's but it's good. It's tonally it's different. It's a different story, different characters, because in the end it all comes down to character and the way that you write and the way you express those ideas.
I was also very excited, talking to Netflix, Mark, and streaming. I was very excited to see Sarah Pinborough's new series on Netflix come up. Someone actually mentioned it. So, have you seen Behind Her Eyes? And I'm like, Behind Her Eyes? That sounds familiar. And I was like, hang on a minute. We interview. And I remember, if I remember rightly, back at that interview with Sarah Pinborough, wasn't she talking about The Deal?
Yep.
And how many years ago was that? That was like,
she talks about the deal. We had the first copy of the book, didn't we?
We had the first copy of the book, and after she appeared on the Bestseller Experiment, her book went to #1 that following week. Do you remember that? And we took full credit for that. And I think we should also take full credit for how amazing the Netflix series is, because she wouldn't have a career without us, would she? Really? I mean, let's be honest.
We should
get her on and ask her that question.
I'm going to drop her a line and see if
she'll come back on and thank us for what we've done for her career.
It's funny. Weirdly, someone dropped me a line and said, "Didn't you interview Sarah Pinborough?" I said, "Yeah, here's the link." But I am over the moon for her. This is,
me too.
This is every writer's dream come true. It's #1 everywhere.
And it's good. It's really good. That must, I mean, what a relief, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the same, without giving anything away, but it has an extraordinary twist at the end, which when the book came out was very divisive. And of course, when it happens in a TV show or, something like this on Netflix, that division, you see people going, what the hell was that ending about? I couldn't get behind it. And you got other people going, best ending ever.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. More, please, So
let's get her back on the show and have a chat about. I'd love to find out. Like, it'd be interesting to hear the kind of post story after all the things. What happened once they went into production and what the reaction's been like as well. It'd be brilliant, excellent stuff. Well, listen, I think we should jump into a bit of social media before we finish up, Mark.
Yeah. We've had some people we've got our own success stories, and who knows, future Netflix TV series. So these are our patrons and supporters who are getting books out there. If you follow us on social media, you'll find that every now and then we put up a new book that goes into the Bestseller Experiment Alumni Library, which is now bulging onto 2 shelves on my bookshelves now. So first one of these, G.B. Ralph has a new book out, Over and Out, which is a gay romantic comedy novella, and Gavin, for it is his name, Gavin Ralph, he says this book is yet another product of the 200 words a day challenge, the brainchild of the Bestseller Experiment podcast. Can't wait to see what 2021 will bring. Gavin, we are over the moon that that the 200 words a day had something to do with Over and Out, getting out there, and this is book 3 in the series of Arthur and Gabriel's adventures. So Gavin, best of luck with that, and just fantastic news.
Brilliant stuff.
And then we had L.A. Davenport drop us a line via email. And he said he's just launched his second novel, The Nucleus of Reality, or The Recollections of Thomas P. And he says, with this one, I feel less like a fraud and more like a writer. It's the first time I feel I've at least fulfilled the aims I had for the book. So, he's going to send us a copy for the library. But yeah, L.A. Davenport, huge congratulations on that. What a title. The Nucleus of Reality, or The Recollections of Thomas P. Huge congrats on that, man.
Amazing stuff. And also loving to hear about writers recognizing the growth in their own journey, because that's what it's all about, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. Some good news from the Academy and the Bestseller Experiment group. So Jeff White, it's Jeff White who's the author who's been putting up new covers for his books, and they've been really well received. He's seen an uptick in sales on that. Gareth Lewis, he's got a short story in an anthology. Lost Gods is out on March the 1st. Paul Arduin, who's one of the big success stories of the Academy, he writes his amazing mystery novels. His 7th mystery novel is going to be released on March 9th. He's already got 725 full price pre-orders. Wow. So which is just fantastic. So Paul just goes from strength to strength with those. And then 2 of our members, Ian Sainsbury and Arlie Jacobs, have been accepted into a thriller anthology, Make Them Pay, which releases March the 15th. So, our Academates, our Academy members, they are getting their words out there. They're getting read. They're getting sales and pre-orders and all that good stuff. So congratulations to all of you.
Yeah, brilliant. And keep it coming. Keep up the great work. And, it all starts, folks, with simply 200 words a day. So if you want to join us in the 200 word challenge, if you would like to start, we're going into March now. So make March, if March is your month where you're going to start, see if you can, firstly, here's the goal. Can you write 3 days in a row? Sounds easy. It's harder than you think. Can you write 3 days in a row at the same time each day? Bigger challenge, very hard. Give that a go. And if you can you keep it going for the rest of the month, no matter when you start? So we want to hear your stories. Can you write this March? Can you get your record streak, whatever that will be for you in March? So join us. Get over to 200wordchallenge.com and sign up today.
Wonderful stuff. Come and find us on social media as well, folks. We are on Twitter and Instagram and at BestsellerXP, and on Facebook we're Bestseller Experiment, and also bestsellerexperiment.com, and tap the contact tab and we see all your emails and we reply to them too. So drop us a line.
Brilliant. Have a wonderful writing couple of weeks, folks, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode of the Bestseller Experiment podcast. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1
and a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.